E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo.
Flessibilità protetta. Politiche del lavoro. Da oltre 20 anni, nel mondo della somministrazione c'è un punto di riferimento per tutti gli attori coinvolti. Formatemp è il fondo che favorisce la qualificazione delle competenze e l'occupabilità dei lavoratori attraverso il finanziamento di percorsi formativi, che li supporta grazie a specifiche tutele reddituali. Formatemp. Sostiene il tuo domani.
È come se ci conoscessimo. Siamo 1 milione di persone con la stessa energia. Ci incontriamo 1 milione di volte al giorno, in 1 milione di momenti diversi, dentro 1 milione di case. Illumia, insieme con la stessa energia.
E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo.
Flessibilità protetta. Politiche del lavoro. Da oltre 20 anni, nel mondo della somministrazione c'è un punto di riferimento per tutti gli attori coinvolti. Formatemp è il fondo che favorisce la qualificazione delle competenze e l'occupabilità dei lavoratori attraverso il finanziamento di percorsi formativi, che li supporta grazie a specifiche tutele reddituali. Formatemp. Sostiene il tuo domani.
È come se ci conoscessimo. Siamo 1 milione di persone con la stessa energia. Ci incontriamo 1 milione di volte al giorno, in 1 milione di momenti diversi, dentro 1 milione di case. Illumia, insieme con la stessa energia.
E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buongiorno.
Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this meeting entitled Sustainability of the Debt and Economic Development. And we will have as our guest today Fabio Panetta, Governor of Banca d'Italia. Please welcome him with a great round of applause. I will just say a few words of introduction, then the governor will make his speech, and then there will be some questions that will help us go deeper into this theme. So the first thing I wanted to say regards the second word of the title of our meeting, development, because we know that there is a word called GPL, which is actually very strictly connected to development. We move from the idea of a financial economy to another idea of economy that is based on sustainability, but we think that sustainability is just linked to environmental change, but this is a mistake. If you read the 17 points by the United Nations, so you can see that there is much more than that. We need to have men at the center of development, as well as a real economy. The last year, from this location, a professor from the University of Economy in Washington told us that 90% of financial exchanges are linked to just 10% of the real economy. So the theme of how to actually forward development becomes pivotal. And when we talk about the situation, we talk about the financial decree, but the industrial policy, the idea of a development model that has people at its center and is based on the production of goods is in a way abandoned, neglected, and this is not the answer we're looking for. The idea that we can actually do without production and the action is all based on assistance, public assistance, welfare. So I have 4 points I want to actually dwell upon, and then actually the governor will have to develop these points, and they all regard the real economy. So inequality, the first one. Yesterday we had a session, a meeting with Brian Milanovic and Barroso on inequality at world level. And it was extremely interesting because it emerged that inequality is not the result of the welfare as the redistribution of wealth but rather wealth that is redistributed with the development at the center. If the Gini index, so the equality among countries, has decreased, at the same time the level of poverty has increased, as the Nobel Prize winner Esther Dafo said. This in a way can slow down development, because those who are very, very rich do not develop consumption, whereas those who are poor don't have the means to do so. So this is extremely important, because poverty, relative poverty and absolute poverty have increased in Italy lately. So this is very important. Is it possible to have a development model that includes inequality in its variables? There is also another central theme, that is to say, to have a development for the poor and the rich implies production. And a second theme, a second aspect that is structural in Italy is productivity. In the latest 15 years, in many advanced economies, productivity slowed down. But, well, this is our country is a country with a low productivity level. And in Europe as well, the situation is not different. Between the years 2000 and 2019, with an average growth in Europe from 0.83 in Spain and 1.1 in Germany, has registered a value of 0.3, with a very low value in the fields of services and construction. So we need to boost productivity, which means the ratio between the product and the number of people employed. So if we don't do that, if we do not carry out this kind of structural intervention, we can actually profit from all of the short-term interventions, like the resilience plan, but we won't resolve this problem. And then there is a third point that is always connected to productivity, and which will be dealt with at the meeting. That is to say that productivity is linked to an increase in investments, not only in terms of machineries, but also in terms of human capital. Because we have a theory from 1962, the School of Chicago developed this link between education and production. But lately, scholars like Anuser demonstrated that this link is given by the quality of education. Other scholars, like Ekman, talked about a dynamic human capital, the so-called Big Five, the so-called horizontal skills, the team building, team skills, emotional stability, openness towards reality. So what is our country doing? We have here in front of us the director of our university. We have talked about this problem. We have a problem of a great number of people with university degrees. We should probably try and improve the quality of our education to make it possible to actually improve productivity as well. Because the studies that have been carried out show that the Far East country that have invested in this quality leap have obtained good results. So there is another important point which is seen actually in a very negative way, that is to say Europe. We cannot solve these problems on our own. As Enrico Letta said a few years ago, we used to be a big country in a small world, but we are now a small country in a big world. So, well, Europe has lost a lot in terms of competitiveness. It's at 65% of competitiveness and production comes from the United States. In 2022, we were about 8,400 billions in Italy, in Europe, against over 27,000 billions of the United States. So our capacity for Europe is 22% of the global GDP. But we cannot solve our problems, the problems we've listed before, on our own. We need to have a common industrial policy. We cannot carry out our own industrial policy. And then there is another theme. We will have Enrico Letta as our guest, the last date of the meeting. We will have to think about the common market, the single market. He has prepared a report on this. And the industrial policy needs to actually improve the situation of inequality that we have. But I'm sure that Governor Panetta will be able to explain better all this. So we see this from the point of view of the meeting, that is to say, try and see how people can live better, feel better, and this is linked with development.
C'è un bicchiere d'acqua? Prendi questo. Buongiorno.
Good afternoon to everyone. Before starting my speech, I'd like to dwell on some considerations on the Rimini meeting. It's my first time here today, and thanks to Professor Vittadini and President Scholz and Dr. Forlani, I had the chance to visit the different pavilions of the meeting, and I must say that it is really moving to see how many people, young people, very young people in some cases, are working hard at traditional and innovative initiatives with different purposes based on entrepreneurship, but also on solidarity. It is extremely moving to see their enthusiasm in carrying out their tasks. So I'm really happy to be here. I'd like to thank Professor Vittadini and President Scholz for their invitation. Professor Vittadini has talked about the main issues that need to be overcome in order to arrive at a solid and balanced, sustainable economic growth. The theme of this year, that is to say, the search for the essence, the essential, it is often actually neglected in our everyday life. The essential is what remains when what is superfluous is eliminated. So it gives a meaning to our actions. We are often distracted by our everyday life, and we lose sight of what is really important, what really matters. The meeting, with the participation of all these young people, offers a unique opportunity to reflect on what is really important in our lives and in our society. So my thoughts today will be on economic aspects, the ones that I'm most familiar with. I don't want to think that the economic aspect is what defines the essence of human life. It is an important part of it because of the central function that work and economic choices have for our lives. Not only because they have an impact on our ability to live a full life, but because they also help to define our identity as members of a community. So in my speech, I will talk about one of the key issues for our economic future, European integration. So I have many questions that I would like to find an answer to. What does the European Union really represent? What are its underlying motivations, and how does the European Union contribute to prosperity, to the common good, to a peaceful coexistence, in short, to what is essential, which is the theme of the meeting. I will speak mainly about Europe, and then I will make a few remarks on Italy. Italy and Europe are intertwined not only from a commercial and financial point of view, but also from a social and regulatory point of view. So to understand the Italian economy, we must start with the economy of the European Union. So let's start, so to speak, from the lessons we can draw from the European integration. The European project began almost 80 years ago from the rubbles of the Second World War, as a response to the collective aspiration to prevent further strife and fights between the states of the continent. The two world wars that followed in just 30 years represented the climax of a history of disputes and fighting that had plagued Europe for centuries, with the opposition between France and Germany at its core. The motivation behind European integration is well summed up in Robert Schumann's declaration of May the 9th, 1950, and I quote, "Europe was not made and we had war." The solution that Schuman proposed was an economic union that would make war, and I quote Schuman again, not only unthinkable, but impossible in reality. So this very far-sighted vision led in 1951 to the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, inspired by important figures like Schuman himself, Jean Monnet, Alcide De Gasperi, and we celebrate this year the 70th anniversary of his death, and Konrad Adenauer. Later, with the Treaty of Rome in 1957, a further step was taken towards the creation of a common market, a customs union, and instruments and tools that could actually reduce regional differences. So this helps us understand the higher purposes of the European project, the creation of common interests and intentions between countries, aiming at creating welfare and prosperity, and with the ultimate goal of ensuring peace. In the words of President Mattarella, that he spoke here last year, European Union is called a mutual commitment to peace that peoples and states have exchanged after the abyss of the Second World War. Only by keeping this essential inspiration alive, we can really face present difficulties with the right strength. Over time, European integration has brought important benefits to European citizens. The abolition of internal custom tariffs has fostered productive specialization and economies of scale, stimulating efficiency and competition and increasing employment and welfare. It is estimated that without the single market, the per capita income in Europe would be 1/5 lower. Our income would be of 1/5 lower. The creation of the Union in 1992 and the launch of the Economic and Monetary Union in 1999 were two major milestones that expanded the economic coordination of policies between member states and introduced the single monetary policy. Since 1999, trade between the Eurozone countries increased by a quarter in relation to the gross domestic product. And the links between companies within European production chains have intensified. The euro has become the world's second currency, strengthening our economic sovereignty and our international relevance. So we have had benefits from this. However, the crises that have hit our continent in less than 20 years have put the Economic and Monetary Union to the test. The response to the sovereign debt crisis of 2010-12 that followed the financial crisis of 2008 and 9 was a misstep on the European path due to the incomplete institutional setup of the Eurozone at the time. The austerity policy adopted at the time made the recessionary effects even stronger, making the subsequent recovery slow and fragile and causing economic and political rifts between member states. By contrast, the responses to more recent countries triggered by the pandemic and the energy shock have marked a progress in the common policy approach. Significant budgetary interventions were made at the European level, in particular with the Next Generation EU program, to support economic activity and thereby reinforcing the effects of the monetary policy. Aid to the private sector was accompanied by measures that aimed at raising potential growth. European governments now have the task of not dissipating, so to say, this momentum and to continue along the common path. But paraphrasing Jacques Delors, another important figure of Europeanism, it is necessary to match the fireman who puts out the fires, an architect who designs the buildings in order to build a stronger and united Europe. So let's move to the effects of the recent crisis and geopolitical tensions. The European project now faces both internal and external challenges that put its solidity and cohesion to the test. The weakening of economic growth, the transition from industry to services, and the associated fragmentation of the social fabric, the difficulties of integrating an increasingly large immigrant population, the gaps in terms of development between different areas of the continent, widened by the sovereign debt crisis, have eroded confidence in the European project in many countries. Nationalistic drives have emerged and the integration process has slowed down. The common response to the pandemic has only mitigated this trend. These are phenomena that are not exclusively European. They manifest themselves also globally. The unprecedented sequence of shocks observed in recent years, from the pandemic to Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the energy crisis, has had far-reaching economic repercussions, accentuating pre-existing protectionist drives. After decades during which globalization seemed unstoppable, geopolitical disputes have once again threatened the international trading system and the stability of the world economy. Global trade shows worrying signs of fragmentation, showed by Brexit, by reduced support from the US to the World Trade Organization, and the protectionist disputes between the USA and China. Moreover, major countries show a growing reluctance to depend on commercial partners with whom they do not share consolidated relations or political, economic, and cultural affinities. These developments fuel the fear that the world may once again split into economically, politically, and even militarily opposed blocs. In fact, they call into question the principles of international cooperation and the multilateral setup that have underpinned world development and contributed to peace between the major powers since the Second World War. So you see that economic, social, international, and political phenomena are intertwined, and this entails risks for the European economy, which is dependent on foreign demand and poor in raw materials, and thus vulnerable in a trade-fragmented world. European authorities now have the difficult task to guarantee prosperity to European citizens in a world that is less stable and less open. This requires progress in several directions. First of all, it is necessary to continue along the path of integration. A test for the new European legislature will be the ability to confirm the use of common spending projects and to move towards a more complete and more integrated union, both on the financial and on the fiscal level. Since with the program Next Generation EU, which will end in 2026, which is not so far away, it is necessary to start reflecting on the next steps, because this program is coming to conclusion. The design and scope of future programs will depend, to a large extent, on the success of current programs, and in particular on the ability of single countries to use the funds made available by their respective recovery and resilience plans. Secondly, it is important to relaunch growth, not only to ensure the well-being of European citizens, but also to continue to have our place in the world. 20 years ago, both the European Union and the United States produced a quarter of the world income. Since then, the weight of the European Union has fallen to 18%, whereas that of the United States has remained exchanged. So Europe is less important economically. Strengthening the European economy must take place on several dimensions: rebalancing its dependence on foreign demand, enhancing the single market, making it more competitive, putting it at the forefront at technological and energetic level, and make it capable of providing for its own external security. On previous occasions, I have discussed possible intervention in these fields. I will not do so again. My speech is published on the website of the Banca d'Italia, and you will see all the links and all the speeches and all the measures that were used in the past to relaunch growth in Europe. Today, I would like to dwell on some relevant aspects, and we will start by demography and the labor markets. Demographic projections indicate that in the coming decades, the number of European citizens of working age will decrease, and the number of elderly people will increase. So these dynamics risks having negative effects on the resilience of pension system, the healthcare system, and the willingness to undertake and innovate. Elderly people do not usually innovate, and the sustainability of public debts as well. So in order to counter these effects, it is essential to strengthen human capital and increase the employment of young people and women. Since we have less people of working age, we cannot avoid using the resources that we have. And this is true particularly in some countries like Italy, where there is a big gender and age gap of the labor market. Also, measures favoring an inflow of legal foreign workers can be seen as an economically rational response, regardless of other assessments from the ethical or social point of view. The entry of legal immigrants has to be managed in a coordinated way within the Union, balancing production needs with social setups and strengthening the integration of foreign citizens into the education system and the labor market. Then there is also the issue of productivity and technology. Even with more employment, more foreign workers, the contribution of labor to growth will be limited. Only a higher productivity, that is to say an increase in the output per hour worked, will ensure development and high incomes. However, as Professor Vittadini was saying, productivity growth in Europe is very slow. Over the past 2 decades, we have lagged behind the United States by 20 percentage points, mainly due to the difficulty European companies have in using new technologies in the production process. According to recent studies, this weakness of European enterprises reflects the fragmentation of research and development activities and the poor integration between science and business. The European industry is trapped in intermediate technology sectors and is not present in those sectors that are at the frontier. Despite the excellence of research conducted in individual countries, the case of artificial intelligence is very important. This is just an example. I could mention many other examples. European universities produce quality research in the field of AI. Nevertheless, our company have a presence that is very limited in the development of the technology. Between 2013 and 2023, private investment in AI amounted to 20 billion in Europe, compared to 330 in the United States and 100 billion in China. So it's clear that we invest less. 20 billion against 330 billion and 100 billion. It is clear, for both economic and strategic reasons, that Europe cannot be just a mere user of this technology. We have to have an active role in its production. A significant European presence in this sector, which is dominated by a few global technological giants at the moment, would increase competition and bring benefits that go way beyond the production dimension and concern the essential rights of citizens, such as protection of personal data and pluralism in the information sector. Strengthening Europe, and therefore Italy, is more than just an economic need. It is also a way to assert our strategic sovereignty and our fundamental values. So we have to look ahead now. To overcome its weaknesses and keep the pace with the global progress, the European Union will have to undertake profound reforms and make substantial investments in the coming years. So reforms and investments. Among the reforms, I have already stressed the importance of creating a common fiscal capacity, without which the current European governance, characterized by a single monetary policy but fragmented budgetary policies at national level, remains unbalanced. So we have an unbalanced European governments at the moment. The idea that the monetary union can function effectively without a centralized fiscal capacity is a mere illusion and must be overcome. A common fiscal policy would correct this imbalance and strengthen the cohesion between member states, facilitating large-scale strategic investments as those in the field of AI. Among the other reforms that are needed for the competitiveness of the European economy, I would just mention the enlargement of the single market to sectors that are now excluded, such as telecommunications and energy, in order to stimulate competition and efficiency, the creation of a regulatory environment that is favorable to entrepreneurial activity and that can attract private investments, and the strengthening of links between the academic world and the production system in order to transform the result of research into competitive products and services. Because nowadays we do the research, but the products are done elsewhere. Even on the financial markets front, where integration is well advanced, in Europe, we don't have a significant progress towards the completion of the bank in Europe and the creation of a single capital market. In terms of investment, European leaders have already identified the key sectors on which to focus their efforts: the double transition, environmental or green transition, and digital transition, and sectors that are strategic, such as food, energy, health, and defense, where we need to reduce our dependence from other countries. We have learned that it can be dangerous to be dependent from other countries for the Eurozone. Investments in this sector can be effective only if they are made at European level, with both the public and private funds. The expenditure required is so large, some hundreds of billions per year for many years, that it is unrealistic to think that public finances or individual countries alone can sustain it. In the text of my speech, you have all the references to understand what are the expenses that call for substantial investments. Many of the activities mentioned have the nature of supranational public goods and therefore require a coordinated approach at European level. That is to say, products, activities that are produced by someone and that are used by many. So this would be an incentive to invest in these sectors. So in this case, we can expect a common European approach, and we will also be able to benefit from economies of scale and increase the effectiveness of interventions and investments. And now let's move to what is essential, the essence for Europe and Italy. Many of the structural weaknesses of the European economy that I have just mentioned can be found in the Italian economy, and sometimes they're even stronger there. In the final considerations of last May, I dwelt on the structural problems that have been holding back our development for a quarter of a century, from low growth to an unsatisfactory trend in investments, from stagnating productivity to the worrying demographic outlook. On that occasion, I did not fail to emphasize the signs of vitality that have emerged after the pandemic in our economy. Investments, employment, and growth have shown a recovery, and Italian companies have demonstrated that they can be competitive on international markets, and this should not be underestimated. This progress allows us to look to the future with confidence. Without indulging in optimism, we must build on them to achieve sustained, lasting, and inclusive development. Growth remains the fundamental goal for Italy, but in order to achieve it, we must tackle the unresolved structural problems. We must focus on the essential goals: strengthening competition, enhancing human capital, increasing labor productivity, increasing the employment of young people and women, and defining appropriate migration policies. The crucial problem, anyway, continues to be the reduction of public debt in relation to output. A high debt makes funding for businesses more costly and thus slow down their competitiveness and incentive to invest. It exposes the Italian economy to the erratic movement of the financial markets. It diverts resources away from anti-cyclical policies, social interventions, and measures in favor of development. Italy is the only country in the Eurozone where public spending on interest on debt is almost equal to that on education. And I have to emphasize this comparison because it shows how the high debt is a burden for the future generations' opportunities. Tackling the debt issues requires stability-oriented fiscal policies that aim at increasing primary surpluses. However, debt reduction will be difficult without an acceleration of economic development. The way forward is through a cautious management of public accounts accompanied by a decisive increase in productivity and growth. This virtuous circle would significantly increase the likelihood of success and strengthen the credibility of our policies by easing the burden due to interest expenditure. In conclusion, what are the choices that will give us a better tomorrow? The answer can be found in the values that have inspired the evolution and as well as the creation of the European Union. After the devastation of the Second World War, the essence for Europe has become clear, finally: to build a prosperous a prosperous and, above all, peaceful society. This founding value must continue to guide our choices, especially at times in which conflicts and tensions have re-emerged. The recipes are those that have guided us so far, based on the principle of cooperation and the goal of building a modern economy capable of facing global challenges. The aim is to achieve sustained and inclusive growth as a condition for the common good, and the contribution of Italy will be decisive on this path. We need to address structural weaknesses, reduce public debt, and promote high growth. Thus, we will strengthen our economy and contribute to the solidity of the entire European Union. Only in this way we'll be able to leave a future generation in Italy and Europe that has been able to distinguish the essential from what is superfluous, directing its choices towards what really matters. I thank you all.
Grazie per
Thank you. Thank you very much for your exhaustive talk. And I would like to start the second part of our meeting by going into depth when it comes to the three topical themes of this related to your speech. The first one is Europe. We've listened to your speech, and we know that Europe must have a structural nexus with Italy. So how can we overcome the knots that seem to divide us? When we always talk about the Stability Pact, for instance, how is it possible to overcome the idea that the Stability Pact should include investment, which to some observers and politicians seems to be a snare for our development? The second theme, which is another critical element of this nexus with Europe, is the monetary policy. We know that over the last few years, the ECB, in order to fight against inflation, has adopted stricter policies by increasing the interest rate on money. Do you think that in order to implement what you said, this period is at an end, or do you think that we should wait for a relaunch and for recovery to come? And this topic is also related to what is happening in Italy. You've talked about the new generation EU. We are at the core of this theme. What do you think about this? What do you think about our way to use these investments? Can this be a possibility to have a more consistent economic growth, or a relaunch for productivity, or is it simply a period of time, and then we should we should start all over again, as it happens in a famous film? So thank you, Professor. These are very interesting and important questions. Let's start from the first one, Stability Pact. Should we include investment? How should they be? How should we define the aggregate which enter this agreement regulating the fiscal policies of the member states? I would like to say something before answering. I believe that the discussion on the rules is not the most important discussion. We should not reduce debt only because we have European rules. We must reduce the debt because it is convenient. It is beneficial for us to do so. We spend for training, for building the future, as much money as we spend for paying back the interest on past expenditure. This obviously is not beneficial. It is not wise for Italy. Italy should reduce the debt. The debt is sustainable, but it entails inefficiencies. We must invest on the future. Having such a high debt forces Italy to spend money to face past mistakes. And as we saw, these mistakes did not lead Italy to a sensational growth. So the need to reduce debt goes beyond the European rules. The new Stability Pact that you mentioned, well, in the past, I stated that we should have been more bold during that pact, we should have established new rules towards a centralized tax policy at European level. This was not the case. And then another topic was that of simplifying. The new pact is as complicated as the old one. We need an engineer to understand all the details. But we have a progress. A progress was made to reduce the debt in relation to the output. We should act on both these terms, the debt and the output. In order to intervene on the debt, we need to adopt cautious tax policies. To intervene on the output, on the growth, we should carry out reforms. We should carry out investments. We should have a midterm objective, and this was introduced in the new pact. We have a new stability pact, a new governance at European level, envisaging for states to adhere to 4-6 years plans, depending on the quality of reforms. And there's a debate between the member states and the European Commission in this respect. The consistency of the European plan, tax, prudence and stability. The debt must be sustainable. The Italian debt is sustainable, and that's obvious. However, it should not be high so that we spend money in a suboptimal way. As for the monetary policy, well, the European Central Bank has adopted a restrictive monetary policy over the last 2 years for a very simple reason, because we experienced a high inflation. Inflation at the end of 2022 reached a maximum peak of 10%. Obviously, as you know, inflation has a series of negative effects on savings, on economy. It entails redistribution of resources. It is a sort of a hidden tax. And the European Central Bank has in its statute the reduction to 2% of the inflation. So it intervened, and with the intervention of the European Central Bank, this inflation was prevented from becoming rooted and persistent, so that it damaged the economies and the output. This, of course, had effects. It reduced inflation. It curbed, in some way, growth. The end of restriction has already begun. Last June, we reduced the interest rates by 25 basic points. And then there's a discussion on what the ECB Council will do in September. I have my own idea, but I will not dwell on these aspects because we will have to discuss these aspects in an institutionally dedicated context, which is that one. I believe that from now on, we can expect a loosening of monetary policies, because inflation is going down, because the world economy is slowing down. The Chinese economy is also slowing down. As for the U.S., we saw that they are having some trouble at economic level as well. There were overreactions on the part of markets, and the European economy is also going through a stage of low growth or stagnation. When we have lower growth, inflation is reduced, and so monetary policy can be less restrictive. As for the Next Generation EU plan and the National Resilience Plan, your question is what effects will this plan have? I believe we have the adequate conditions so that this plan has positive benefits. Over 9 points of GDP. It is a plan which for Italy is financed for 2/3 with loans and other subsidies on the part of Europe. It is a plan based on investments, largely based on investments. Investments referring to activities that contribute to strengthening the growth of products and output, diversification of energy sources, digital aspects. It is a plan that is being implemented alongside with reforms. A law that must accompany this plan, reforms that should accompany the plan, and the law is debated every year. There have been some reforms when it comes to the law, for instance, to the legislative sector. As other centers of analysis, we have estimates, and our estimates is that overall, from 2021 to 2026, the effect of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan is going to be of 9 percentage points on GDP due to the demand. So an impact of expenditure and investments on the demand with a reference to a trend. We will go upwards overall for 9 percentage points, and then we will get back to the trend. But we're also going to have an effect on potential income, 4 percentage points. So not only a temporary effect, which is then reabsorbed, but also an increase in this trend. These are estimates, of course. They are subject to uncertainty. A lot will depend on the quality of reforms, on productive activity. The impact of the National Resilience Plan will depend on the extent to which we will strengthen competitiveness and the extent to which investments will strengthen the innovation ability of the companies. But I believe that we have good reasons to think that it will have beneficial effects on the Italian economy. And then one last thing. The National Resilience Plan should mark a method. The idea that the state intervenes in the economy with more investments, aimed at strengthening the growth potential and reforms. If this is not a single intervention, it will become the way in which the public sector intervenes on the economy, and in this case, we're going to have a long-lasting effect on the economy. I'm very glad to listen to somebody saying positive words referring to our future, because we always listen to very, very negative outlooks and very negative comments, and it is very pleasant for me to listen to these words from the governor of the Bank of Italy. And from this point of view, we would like to conclude the meeting with some questions on the part of young people. And young people, as we heard, will have to come to terms with this change in the future outlooks. I would like to call Luca Fare. These are young researchers in economics. They have a profile. They've spent some of their university career abroad. Well, you're intimidating me. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your speech. My question refers to the role of public policies, fiscal policy in particular, can have in this very uncertain phase marked by economic instability of the last few years. Due to the emergencies you've listed, we've witnessed an increase of intervention of public institutions and the European institutions. Interventions were needed within the economies. The intervention has become greater vis-à-vis the past situation. And I would like to ask you whether this increasing presence of the public sector will become a typical element of the development model, or whether it is just a stage, just a phase. Then we have Andrea Viola with another question. Good afternoon. Thank you for your speech. My question refers to the bank system and how it can support the economy. Over the last few years, we saw that thanks to the European Union policy, on the one hand, that the banks managed to increase when it comes to their profits, but the consequence for the companies is a reduction of credit availability, and this has an impact in particular on micro enterprises, which are the majority of the Italian entrepreneurial fabric. So I have two questions. Considering that these companies are funded most of all by bank credits, how are banks called upon to act in this macroeconomic context to continue to support Italian companies? And on the one hand, how can they help companies to grow, including in size, and how can they accompany them to make greater use of alternative sources of financing? The last question by Anna Calvi. Good afternoon, and thank you for your speech. My question refers to the capital markets. Despite some steps towards integration, the European capital markets are still fragmented, in particular vis-à-vis the U.S. market. So this is why I would like to ask you what changes are needed to be able to attract more resources, and what is the role of capital markets in relaunching growth and productivity? Thank you.
Allora, intanto
First of all, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you for the knowledge that you have and that emerges from your questions that are linked with the evolution of economy over the last years and touch upon very important and controversial issues. So the first question, fiscal policy will have a bigger role in the future. Yes, probably fiscal policy will have a greater role to play in the future, and for two reasons. First reason, the so-called economic shock, the unexpected events, have become more frequent, and they are global and quite strong, and the monetary policy alone cannot face it. One example is that of the pandemic. When the COVID pandemic broke out, we were all locked down. We were staying at home. There was a steep decrease in investments, in consumption. So the monetary policy could not by itself sustain the crisis. The interest rates at that moment for the European Bank were already negative, and you cannot go beyond a certain limit. So there was the need for a contribution by the fiscal policy. So global shocks are more frequent than in the past, so this calls for a contribution on the part of the fiscal policy and of the monetary policy. Second reason, the shocks we have experienced in past years are the so-called offer shocks. That is to say, those that have to do with production. Monetary policy is efficient if you talk about demand shocks that regard consumption and investments. But when the shock hits incentive to production, the monetary policy is not enough to intervene. So there is the need to have the intervention of the fiscal policy. Let's think about the increase in the oil price over the last few years after the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The monetary policy couldn't do much because the oil's price is determined on international markets. It's not something that is that depends on the European policy. So there are some countries that are very influential on the price of on the oil price, and they are not European countries. So in that case, governments intervened, first of all, to subsidize the consumption of energy in order to actually make the effect of this shock less felt, so that to avoid that the effects would be permanent. And then the fiscal policy also encouraged the switch from the use of fossil energy to alternative energies, wind and sun energy, solar energy. And we have a project, Repower EU, that focuses exactly on these energies, solar and wind energy. So this means that these interventions are anti-cyclical interventions that are more expansive in a slow economic phase, but they can be more efficient when the economy is growing. Let's go back to the second question, the banking system. It is extremely relevant for two reasons. First of all, the monetary policy, in order to increase demand in Europe, the European Central Bank intervened with a great, so to speak, offer of liquidity. So the inflation arrived and taxes increased rapidly. So this led to an increase in the taxes on debts and the stability on the taxes on deposits, because the banks didn't need to compete on these on the latter. So this was an effect of the monetary policy. And the second reason was that there was first a phase of recession and then a recovery, because governments intervened subsidizing labor. We have had different measures to sustain and support companies. So there was no insolvency. This was done because of economic policy reasons, but the credit is now reducing, credit to enterprises. Some studies show that this is the effect of the demand. Enterprises have profits, investments are growing slowly, and they need less credit, so to speak. Obviously, these profits will not last forever. Economy is slowing down, so the banks will need to sustain demand, investments, and production activity. How can bank help enterprises in growing? By giving financial support that can diversify funding sources, providing services, providing also new forms of expertise that go beyond the mere fiscal knowledge. Obviously, banks cannot intervene in all the different phases of the life of Italian enterprises. They are small enterprises mainly, and there are some aspects that have nothing to do with banks. In some cases, there is a lack of human capital, and it is not easy for managers of small enterprises to become managers of big enterprises, large enterprises. Sometimes it is optimal for them to have small dimensions, so they may be reluctant to open up to external partners. Because if an enterprise grows, it needs to attract capital from outside the enterprise. So there is some kind of reluctance, because there are a lot of family enterprises in Italy. But there might be also other reasons. If an enterprise grows, it is open to criticism. It is subject to certain rules. So sometimes enterprises prefer to remain small. So banks can help enterprises, but there are other factors. There was another question on the capital markets. Well, this is a fundamental component of the European Union, the single European capital market, because there is a sharing of the risk. There is a public budget, and then the capital market. An Italian can buy the titles that are actually issued in Germany. We don't have this. It would be really important to have a single capital market in order to share the risks. And the reason why we don't have it is that we don't have a European title. If we look at the history of the most important financial markets in the world, they were all created around public obligations. In the United States, for instance, when the railway was created, that's when the bonds were issued, public bonds were issued, and this implied the need for other financial services, safeguard services, management services. But this is not true only for the US markets, also for the financial market of the United Kingdom, for instance. So if we look at how financial markets work, there is an initial situation where there is a diversification that is based on a bond that does not entail a risk. We don't have a European governance that can make it possible to have to issue European bonds. So it is very difficult to have a single capital market. Oh, I believe that this session, this meeting, taught us something also about the title of the meeting. What is the essence? The essence is to learn, to know. The governor has made some positive and innovative proposals on Europe. Europe has become, in a way, a very divisive theme. But what we need to do is to find mechanisms, as the European bonds, the governor was mentioning, that will enable an improvement. So we need to understand the problems and the issues in order to be able to improve the situation. So this is the essence. And this is something that is very important also for the public debate. And then there is the method, a dialogue, because I do believe that today it is quite strange that the governor of the Banca d'Italia can talk to experts, but also to people that work at different levels, entrepreneurs, young people, and have a dialogue on these themes so that there can be a link between institutions that are fundamental for our development and the life of our citizens that, see also an element of hope in this. And then there is another issue that is, to say, continuity. I'm a president of the Foundation for Subsidiarity, and I say that the meeting, the Rimini meeting, is a moment in life, in our everyday life, that is extremely important to acquire knowledge, acquire new elements. But it is important that the commitment goes on. So these are questions that make us improve. So the essence here is knowing, is dialogue and continuity. So I would like to thank the governor for all the interesting things he said about in his speech and for the method he talked about. So we will hope to have him here again very soon. Thank you.
questa civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo.
Flessibilità protetta. Politiche del lavoro. Da oltre 20 anni, nel mondo della somministrazione c'è un punto di riferimento per tutti gli attori coinvolti. Formatemp è il fondo che favorisce la qualificazione delle competenze e l'occupabilità dei lavoratori attraverso il finanziamento di percorsi formativi, che li supporta grazie a specifiche tutele reddituali. Formatemp. Sostiene il tuo domani.
È come se ci conoscessimo. Siamo 1 milione di persone con la stessa energia. Ci incontriamo 1 milione di volte al giorno, in 1 milione di momenti diversi, dentro 1 milione di case. Illumia, insieme con la stessa energia.
E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
È bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo.
Flessibilità protetta. Politiche del lavoro. Da oltre 20 anni, nel mondo della somministrazione c'è un punto di riferimento per tutti gli attori coinvolti. Formatemp è il fondo che favorisce la qualificazione delle competenze e l'occupabilità dei lavoratori attraverso il finanziamento di percorsi formativi, che li supporta grazie a specifiche tutele reddituali. Formatemp. Sostiene il tuo domani.
È come se ci conoscessimo. Siamo 1 milione di persone con la stessa energia. Ci incontriamo 1 milione di volte al giorno, in 1 milione di momenti diversi, dentro 1 milione di case. Illumia, insieme con la stessa energia.
E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite